Hey, what's up, microchurch? Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10, verses 13 through 16. And as you get there, I want to ask you this question. Have you ever received a gift that you didn't feel like you deserved? Right? It's such an incredibly humbling experience. My wife and I have been blessed over the years by receiving things from people that we feel like we didn't deserve. We've been blessed with trips or retreats to amazing places, uh, tickets to football games, or many amazing things. But every time this happens, right, we have to remind ourselves and recognize the fact that we didn't do anything to deserve these, right? It wasn't something that we did to get them. It was a gift that was given to us. And so if we approach something, if we approach a gift as something that we deserve, right? It's no longer a gift. It's a wage, essentially. It's something that is done in exchange for something else. And so today, what we're going to see is that in God's kingdom, a gift can only be received, right? It's never earned. And so picking up in verse 13 in Mark chapter 10, Mark writes this, it says, they were bringing children to him that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, let the children come to me, do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. And he took them in his arms, and he blessed them, laying his hands on them. All right, so to catch you up here a little bit, Jesus has already begun his journey towards Jerusalem. And ultimately, right, he's on his way to the cross. But this journey that he's on it's also a journey of discipleship. Right? He's teaching his disciples what it means and what it looks like to be a follower of him, right? To follow Christ, to be a disciple that makes disciples. And in Mark chapter 10 verses 1 through 12, what we saw in Jesus teaching this is that he started this whole section by talking on marriage, right? And the institution of marriage, and that marriage should not be viewed upon in terms of its failures as the Pharisees typically viewed it, but that marriage is the most fundamental institution that God created, right? That marriage is this institution that is to last a lifetime, right? It's a lifetime commitment between one man and one woman, submitting to one another in love and in humility, right? Humility is a major theme through the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to see that some more today. And see, humility, right? The reason it's so important to Mark, and especially when it comes to discipleship, is humility is foundational for discipleship, right? It's foundational for following Christ, and it was true then, and it's true for us today, right? If we claim to be followers of Jesus, humility should be at the core of who we are, right? I love what C.S. Lewis said about humility. He said that it's not thinking less of ourselves, but it's thinking of ourselves less, right? Meaning that the goal of a humble heart, right, is not to humiliate ourselves or by continually deprecating ourselves with our thoughts and in our words, right? In fact, we should actually be very honoring towards ourselves, right? Because our Creator honors us, right? But what humility does is humility doesn't seek to put ourselves down. Humility seeks to put other people up, right? To put other people before ourselves and before our own desires. And so that's what we're talking about when we say humility. Jesus himself said that if anyone would be first, he must be last and servant of all. Right? Those aren't just inspiring words for us to hear and agree to. Right? Those are words that we are to put on display as we follow Christ. Those are the words, right, that basically define the life that he invites us into as we follow him. And so from the end of chapter 8 all the way through chapter 10, one of the primary things that Mark displays in the life and the teaching of Christ is humility. And in today's passage, we see a few primary things in regards to humility and discipleship, right? Jesus shows us a disciple's proper view of children. He shows a disciple's proper view of self, and then he shows us how those two things relate to one another, right? What Jesus is doing is he's crafting and he's transforming our hearts through his teaching so that we can be prepared to do the work of his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Right? He's doing this because he wants us to be participants in his kingdom, not just witnesses of his kingdom. And so the first thing that he shows us is that disciples seek to point others to Jesus. Right? That's our primary thing. What we do is we seek to point other people to Jesus first and foremost. Right? People in this story were bringing their kids or their sisters or their brothers or their nephews and their nieces, maybe their neighbors. I don't know. They're bringing all these kids to Jesus because they wanted Jesus to heal them and to bless them and to touch them. But the disciples, they didn't like this. Right? They didn't like Jesus having to spend so much time and so much energy on these kids. And so what did they do? Right? They stepped in the way. Think about that. How often do we do that very thing, right? Jesus is doing something great. He's doing something amazing, and we step in the way, right? We get in between what God is doing and what we want. And the disciples do that here. And so the question that we have to ask is why, right? Why were they stepping in the way, and why did they start turning these kids away? Right? Children in the first century culture weren't highly viewed upon. In fact, they were seen as someone with no position, someone who had no rights. They were seen as another mouth to feed, another person to care for, and that's what was going on. Right? They even had a dump outside of town where people would take and leave their unwanted children. See, they thought that it was more important to focus on adults because it was the adults that mattered more. But what we see here is Jesus kind of thought otherwise. In fact, Jesus became indignant. Right? This was one of the only occurrences of this particular word in the New Testament. And it's actually two words that are combined together to mean much grieved. Right? Jesus was deeply grieved by the decision of his disciples to the point that he actually ended up looking at him and said, "Let the children come to me. Don't hinder them from coming." Right? Jesus does not want us as his disciples or as his followers to hinder anyone from coming to him, particularly young people. Right? In this story, it was Jesus' disciples who were in the way. Right? They were the ones preventing the kids from coming to Jesus. And as followers of his way, we have to make sure that we're not putting roadblocks in the way of the next generation. Right? We have to make sure that we're not preventing them from coming to Jesus. And the best way to do this is to model genuine Christianity, right? To humble ourselves, to serve the least of these, to love God and to love one another, to place a high priority on the family unit, to equip the family so that their homes are saturated with the gospel and with prayer and with grace, to disciple kids in their faith journey, to let them ask questions and let them have fun in the process, right? That's what we are supposed to do, to lead people to Jesus. The second thing that we see in this story, in this passage, is disciples seek humility in life. Right? In other words, childlike people have the kingdom. Right? If you remember, the disciples thought that Jesus was coming to rule and to reign in this physical way, that he was going to be a great king like David, and that he was going to conquer and defeat the Romans and make Israel into this strong and powerful nation. But this was not what Jesus' mission was. This was not the type of kingdom that he was coming to usher in. The type of kingdom that he was establishing was one of humility, right? One of peace, one that the children needed, right? So Jesus is pointing out to his disciples what a true disciple actually looks like here. He's pointing out that the kingdom of God is for the people that know they can't earn it, right? The people that know that they need Jesus. Right? Those are the people that Jesus is after. He's after the people that are completely dependent upon him and that can do nothing but receive from him. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29, I love what Paul wrote. He says, "Consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards, and not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. And God chose what is low and despised in this world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." Right? The difference between most adults and almost all children is children are completely dependent and reliable on someone else, where adults are completely independent and reliable only on themselves. So young kids are dependent on other people. And the same is true for a disciple, right? A follower of the way of Jesus. we cannot do enough. I want y'all to hear this. We cannot do enough. We cannot earn enough. We cannot learn enough. We cannot give enough. We cannot be good enough. We cannot go to church enough, sing enough, post on Facebook enough, do enough, right? We cannot do enough to earn our way into his kingdom. The only way, right? The only way that we enter into the kingdom is by receiving the kingdom like a child. See, a true disciple knows that their only resource, their only hope is Jesus Christ. It's the people that cling to him, that are desperate for him and desperate for his presence in their lives. But what do we do with this? Right? What do we do with this truth and this reality? The truth is one, we relearned the kingdom mentality. Right? We have to admit and we have to realize that we still often think that we live in our own little kingdoms, or that we have to earn God's grace or earn his salvation, or that we deserve it. Even the truth is, we even sometimes think that we can lose it if we mess up. But I want you to hear me on this. That's false, right? It's all a lie. God's kingdom is not built on the grounds of our work or our actions or our behaviors. His kingdom is built on him and his truth and his love and his mercy and his grace. Right? The second thing that we have to do is we have to get involved. Right? As disciples, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are discipling others, that we are equipping them to be disciples who go out and make disciples. That means we have to get involved in people's lives, especially young people's lives. Right? We have to come alongside them, help them grow in their faith and their walk with Jesus. And the third thing is we have to make disciples who make disciples. And whether that's at home, at work, in our community, wherever it is, right? We have to make disciples who make disciples. But in all of that, we have to realize that we don't do anything to earn our way into his kingdom. Right? We do these things because we are in his kingdom, because he gave us that gift. Right? The kingdom of God can never be earned. It can only ever be received.